Folks can get back from lunch. So while folks are settling in, I'll do some quick introductions of our panelists. So my name is Marta Arguello. I'm the Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility and also part of the Standing Together Against Neighborhood Drilling, and have been part of these conferences since the very beginning. And so it's always wonderful to see a new crop of folks and more people becoming aware of the connection between health and the environment, and the importance of having a strong, bold, and powerful health voice that supports our efforts to fight for environmental justice and social justice and racial justice. And as you heard in the beginning, all of those things that you heard from Dr. Jyoti Pavula are really the things that motivate all of us. And this is an amazing panel. There are many, many, many years of experience here collectively working on a range of issues. We wanted to talk about how the environment affects us in air, water, soil, in our own bodies, and how that impacts reproductive health. So today's panel really are a panel of folks who I've worked with for many, many years on many issues related to air quality, water quality, soil contamination. All have mentored me. Nancy, Jane, and Angela have all mentored myself and many of our allies within the environmental justice movement on many issues. So you're really going to hear from folks who are deeply entrenched and have many, many years of fights and know the importance of bringing the health community to those fights. So each of us are going to do a little 3-minute presentation about the work that we do, and then we're just going to have a conversation about what's needed and how many of you who are becoming passionate about this issue can step up and help us transform the situation that many communities are living in. So again, I'm with Physicians for Social Responsibility. We're a physician membership organization that works directly with impacted communities. So you heard Dr. Pavula talking about as an ambassador of our organization, what we do and how we get physicians directly to be working with communities. And we engage on a number of issues from air quality issues. And so we're part of the effort to win a 2,500-foot setback around oil and gas. We work on lots of soil contamination issues. So we've been part of communities, whether that's Jordan Downs, where there's lead contamination in the soil and issues around displacement, to having worked many years, almost 30 years, in the Santa Susana Mountains at the site of a partial nuclear meltdown, because our organization started as an anti-nuke organization. And so we believe that the powerful voice of physicians, the credible voice of physicians and nurses and health professionals, when united with the powerful voice of organized communities, can actually lead to real change. And we're trying to make that model work in many different spaces. So I'm going to stop there in terms of the background of my organization, but we will talk more about the need to bring the values of public health, the idea of prevention, of primary prevention, to environmental policy. As you probably heard in your different workshops, we don't have a lot of regulations that actually are there to protect health, to prevent exposure, and to protect the reproductive, developmental, cardiac, any part of health, right? If you think of health by body parts, there's very few people within Cal EPA, within any of those regulatory agencies that are actually charged with preventing exposure. And that's the thing we want to change. So we're going to talk about how each of us are trying to do that in our own spaces. So I'll stop, and I think we said Jane, Nancy, and Angela, or Jane, Angela, and Nancy. All right. So Jane Williams is the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics. She has been a mentor to many of us in the environmental justice movement, and has battled regulators as well as major industries. I don't want to say how long, but I think more than 30 years. I think it's more than 30 years. But that's often what it takes. And what you'll hear really is, along with the work that we do, is a history of persistence and staying in the fight, because that's often what it takes to change persistent systems. You all set up?
I think so.
Oh, here we go. They're over here. Yep.
Okay, so I am Jane Williams. I'm the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics, which is a very old network, won't say how long that is, of environmental justice groups throughout California. I'm going to talk about secrets today. I've known Angela here for a really long time, and I've known Mark for a really long time, and I have some secrets that at the end of this presentation, I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to talk about secrets. So our county has this great plan, this One Water LA plan. Because we have the drought and we have climate change, but it's really going to be a problem. And let's find out why. Why is this going to be such a problem, right? Because we have hundreds of chemicals that are on the US EPA candidate list for emerging chemicals, all different kinds of chemicals that, pharmaceutical solvents, they're endocrine disruptors, they're neurotoxins, they are impacting the health of the existing generation, and they're intergenerational toxins. And none of these are actually regulated in your water. So there's no limits of how much of this stuff can be in your water right now. Well, a lot of the stuff that's in your water is in water. There's not like different water. There's one water. Some of these chemicals actually fall from the sky in rain. This is a great graphic, the graphic of emerging awareness. And that is that even today, we're just going to regulate like a handful of chemicals, just a handful, whether it's in air, whether it's in water, or whether it's in consumer products, just a handful. There's over 80,000 chemicals in commercial production right now. Over 10,000 of those have been produced at over 1 million pounds a year. This is chrome platers. I have worked on chrome platers since 1992. One of the first rules that the California Air Resources Board passed was on hexavalent chromium and chrome platers. Why? Because hexavalent chromium is a really, really toxic chemical. We all know this, right? Who didn't see the Brockovich film, right? I mean, of the one chemical that we all know is really bad, whether it's in our water, in our air, or in our blood, or in our kids, it's hexavalent chromium. And you want to see, this is an amazing map because there's only 3 chrome platers in the entire Southern California area that are not in a red zone. That red zone is CalEnviroScreen. That's the top 25% census tracts. Huge environmental justice issue. Polar bears. I know we're we are environmental justice activists, but these are polar bears. They are on the front lines of exposure. That's how polluted we've made the earth. We've polluted something that's way up in the Arctic. So if I go back to here, what do you think we've done to the people that live in these red zones? Same thing. So chemicals move through the environment. They move through the environment. They rain down on us. They get into water. They get into groundwater. They get into soils. They get into our bodies. I asked one of my closest, dearest friends in the environmental justice movement, working in one community, and I asked, well, what chemicals do you think we would find in the breast milk of this one population of people? She's like, well, just tell me what kind of chemicals are being released in the environment. That's what you're going to find in their breast milk, right? So this whole concept that we can somehow reduce exposures, but we can still emit chemicals into the air and into water and all around us, I think that we're past that, okay? I think 20 years ago, maybe we thought we could protect ourselves from that. We can't, okay? They're everywhere. This is a great slide here. I put it up here because it's colorful and it shows just one new class of chemicals that we're working on, these perfluorinated chemicals. And it shows you that they are pervasive in the human body. Plasma, milk, serum. We are not immune from what we're putting into the environment. We're not escaping it. This is the incidence map for 123 TCP. It's a new emerging contaminant. We just set drinking water standards for it. That's probably going to be a fraction of the wells that are contaminated in the state. And these 2 chemicals are 2 of the chemicals that we just recently put notification limits on in drinking water, both in the low part per trillion range. Parts per trillion, that's what science tells us is dangerous in water, dangerous for us to be exposed to. This is a plume in Minnesota. It's 100 square miles. This is a perfluorinated plume. Right underneath us here in Los Angeles, if I asked where all of you were, I could basically tell you in communities throughout Southern California that you're going to see plumes like this. It's going to be solvent plumes. It's going to be perfluorinated plumes, hexavalent chromium plumes. We're living in a time where we have essentially contaminated most of the earth with one chemical or another. This is 1,4-dioxane. This is what it looks like. It's also an emerging contaminant. And so these are the damages to the water. This is an incidence map of all the chemicals that we found in drinking water and the numbers of wells that have been contaminated. So the bottom line is that when we start looking at the number of chemicals we've released in the environment and we look at what's in drinking water, we're going to find that all this stuff's in drinking water. There's going to be something in our drinking water. And so the question becomes, what are we going to do about this? And really, we're not doing anything about it right now. I put this slide up because, you know, who knows how many of these animals are left? There's 73 now. 73 of these left. They think they're dying because of PCB exposure. We stopped PCB manufacturing globally, actually in 2003. In this country, in about 20 years earlier. So the secret that I want to tell you is that chemicals are secret. What chemicals are made, what they're called, where they are, and which ones are getting into your body and which ones are causing health impacts, that is the secret. Because almost all that information is still secret. And until we fundamentally change policy around chemical secrecy, we're never going to save these animals, and we're never going to actually have an impact on people's reproductive health. And again, my colleague Amy, she says to me, Jane, if you're not working on the future, what are you doing? Because what you should be saying and what you should be telling people is, what are the chemical determinants of health in the next generation? For this generation, it's too late. But what are those chemical determinants of health in the next generation? And we have some idea. We know lead, we know mercury, we know cadmium, we know PFAS, we know PCBs, we know dioxin. But we're not even looking at that when we regulate chemicals and when we tell people don't produce these chemicals. And I think we really have to start talking about what we say no to. We have to end chemical secrecy, and we have to start saying no to chemicals that don't degrade in the environment. Okay, thank you.
Coming up next, Angela Johnson. Saying no, you often need. So when it comes to saying no to certain things, sometimes you do really need a good lawyer. So I'm really proud to introduce Angela Johnson Meszaros, who is with Earth Justice. She's their managing attorney of community-based initiatives, and also has worked with PSR, but also one of my mentors over many years. We've worked together 20 years, lots of battles. And so I will stop so she has plenty of time to talk about what's going on.
Good afternoon. That's not very much enthusiasm. Good afternoon. All right, that's a little bit better. I know it's tough, right? And I'm up here. But so good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you all. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Earth Justice, a little bit about the work that we're doing locally, because I'd like to make sure that we have a maximum amount of time for all of us to be able to talk together about the issues that are before us. So Earth Justice is a national nonprofit environmental law organization, and I've been there for about 3 years. And we are the biggest nonprofit environmental law corporation in the country, but I suspect that almost all of you have never heard of us, which is actually kind of awesome, because we pride ourselves on making sure that the clients that we're working with are the people that you've heard of. So for example, you may well have heard of the Standing Rock Sioux and their fight to protect the water. Our lawyers in our Seattle office represented the Standing Rock Sioux in their legal battles. So Earth Justice has, since the beginning of the Trump administration, filed 113 cases against the administration, challenging them on everything from what they're trying to do with the Standing Rock Sioux's land to their efforts to open up oil leases in our public spaces, to how we're going to regulate chemicals and how we're going to clean up the air. So that's what Earth Justice is, and that's what we do. I wanted to just share this slide with you first because as I was putting this together, I was like, oh, our comms team likes to have pictures of children drinking things out of bottles, which I just thought was interesting. But these are two matters that Earth Justice participated in just in the month of October, just to give you a little bit of a feel for what the fight looks like around some of these chemical issues. So that's right, I watched Jim Sad do this. You can't point at that one because that doesn't help. This case right here is a matter that challenged the FDA because they had 7 particular chemicals that they were allowing to be food additives. They brought flavor and smell to foods. Well, the law says you can't put things that cause cancer into food, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's almost like you shouldn't have to have a law that says that. The only thing worse than the fact that we have a law that says that is that the FDA thought it was okay to not be in compliance with that, right? And so there was litigation around this question about whether or not, after we discovered that these 7 particular chemicals were in fact cancer causing, whether or not the FDA had to withdraw the approvals for those to be used in our food. So fortunately, the court ruled that they're going to have to be removed, and they set it up so they would have to ban those chemicals in food the day after the court ruling came out. So that was a great victory, and we were very proud of that. The other, this case here is a case about one of the chemicals Jane was just talking about, PFAS, and the Navy in Pennsylvania, the Navy was using these chemicals that was contaminated in groundwater. And these communities were being impacted, and they brought suit, and they were asking for 2 things. They were asking for health risk assessments, which is something that we often talk about as we're thinking about public health and how we're going to understand how things are impacting our communities. And they were asking for monitoring of their health harms that were related to these chemicals in their environment. In this matter, the court allowed the communities to go forward with their request for monitoring, but the court found that the communities could not ask for health risk assessments because in this matter, the Navy was already, it was already a Superfund site, and the Navy was already trying to clean up the contamination. So I raise these 2 things to just make a point. The law can be very helpful, and sometimes the law actually encompasses common sense things like you can't put things that cause cancer into people's food. And the law is limited in what it can do. The law can only take you so far. And really, the way you make change and the way we're going to protect our communities comes down to the policies that are put in place and the demands that we make of our elected officials. Those are the only 2 things. And those are the things that you have in your hands, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what that looks like on the ground. Finally, I just wanted to say a few words about some of the work that I'm working on here that's relevant, I think, in this room. So we are working to stop Quemeco, which is a secondary lead smelter, from expanding its operation in the city of Industry. So many of you may have already heard of Exide and the lead contamination that's been caused by Exide. Exide has been shut down because of the harm finally got so massive that people could not continue to look away, right? So the communities have been complaining about Exide for 2 decades at least. And so we shut down Exide, leaving Quemeco as the only secondary lead smelter west of the Mississippi. And now Quemeco is telling us that now that we've shut down Exide, those batteries have to go somewhere. They want to expand their throughput by 25% in order to accommodate those batteries in the city of Industry. The community that lives around that facility has decided that it's not just enough, it's actually too much. And so I am very proud to be representing them in their challenge to this permit expansion. And we're going to have that fight around the permit expansion, but we're not going to shy away from the fact that this is actually a political battle. This is a question about whether or not we are going to collectively draw lines and say, no, this far and no further. And that's really what's at stake in the fight at Quemeco. Similarly, you've heard today a couple of times about Stand LA, the group of people who are working to have a health and safety buffer around oil extraction in Los Angeles. So a lot of you may or may not realize that in Los Angeles, we extract a lot of oil. California is the 4th largest oil producing state in the country, and Los Angeles has a significant amount of oil production. That oil production happens right in people's communities. Like there's an oil site, and then there's a cinder block wall, and then 18 inches away, there are windows of people's homes. That's in South LA, the historically Black core of the city of Los Angeles. So I'm really pleased to be representing Redeemer Community Partnership, and my client, actually one of my client representatives, Nikki, is in the room. But I'm really pleased that we're representing them in their challenge to shut that facility down. And there's a long story that I can tell about that, but what I'll just say about it is, after several years of very diligent work by the community members, about 3 months ago, the operators of that facility announced that they were going to shut that site down. So I raised these 2 things in connection with the things that I already told you about, the things we're working out at Earth Justice. Again, just to say, really what we're talking about here is, how do we build that space that says, we're not waiting for the law, we're not waiting for someone to save us, we're not looking outside of our communities for people to come here. What we're doing is standing up in our communities, and we're insisting that the status quo is not acceptable anymore, right? And we're seeing that happen in little pockets in communities. We saw some of that happening in our election last night, right? And there are, we can have conversations about solutions, and I appreciated Jan's call for we can't leave this table without talking about solutions. And I will tell you that the solutions are very clear. The solutions are us standing together to make these demands, and people who are in the public health community are on the front line of that. People care about the health. They care about the health of their children. They care about the health of their grandmothers. They care about the health of their neighbors. And so we need to move the conversation from a conversation that's about, what is the legal structure? What do the studies say? Could we get some more data about this? Yes, we could do all of this. But the thing we could actually do is to start to act right now. And all we need to stand up and say is, no, figure it out. So there you go.
So coming up next, another sister in the struggle, Nancy Zuniga, with el Instituto de Educación Popular de Sur de California, Southern California Popular Education Institute. And she's also a partner in our coalition, Californians for Healthy and Green Economy, who are trying to come up with those yes strategies to figure out, well, how do we move beyond this relationship that we have to toxics in the economy, and how we particularly lift women of color, both out of poverty, but out of being overexposed and underprotected. So I'll hand it over to Nancy.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here again. Little shout out to my community table over there, our team from IDEPSCA, members and very dedicated members of our organization and staff. Let's get this started. Happy to be here. All right. So I was trying to find what to name this, but this is what I was able to come up with. Because I think it sums up the work that I want to showcase. I came into the organization as an intern, actually as a public health intern, but really based on my reality. My mother's a domestic worker, so I'm very connected to the base, part of my reality. And so this is a very personal issue to me as well. So I just want to put that out there just in case I come off a little bold. So immigrant women's organizing for a toxic-free environment. Let me share a little bit about who we are if you don't know who we are. IDEPSCA is here in Pico Union. We organize day laborers, household workers, and just a larger immigrant and low-wage worker community here in Los Angeles. But generally our mission, as you can see there, our emphasis really is organizing and educating with the popular education methodology, which in summary is basically the knowledge of the people to empower, to organize, to change really the realities that are existing in our own communities. And as you can see there, I highlighted solving the problem in their own community. So our approach is really focused on those communities that want to see those changes, that know that something is wrong. Many times, as was mentioned earlier, right, we know the solution. We know something is wrong. But then what do we do, and how can we start doing it within our own communities? I specifically want to talk a little bit about Mujeres en Acción, which is one of the programs that really leads in many ways the environmental justice work of the organization. So what is Mujeres en Acción? Mujeres en Acción is actually a worker-centered group that was created in 2011 by domestic worker members of our organization. Actually, one of the founding members is actually right there. Her name is Carmen. Yeah, I gotta pay props to her. Yes, so domestic worker members of our organization created Mujeres en Acción, all domestic workers trying to seek work, knowing a lot of the realities with many years of experience and seeing a lot of the injustices on different levels came together. As of today, our focus are really through meetings and really looking at what the needs are, not just in terms of working conditions, but really family, community issues, right? And it's really led by the women themselves. A lot of the focus of our organization and of the program is to really do a lot of leadership development so that folks have the tools to be able to create those solutions and carry out those plans. And we as a group, Mujeres en Acción, we say that we value the paid and unpaid work of women, right? Because society often overlooks the unpaid work of women in the family setting and in our communities. And so we really seek to support them in their personal, community, and family development. And a lot of the programming that Mujeres en Acción does on a weekly basis is around that idea, right? Paid and unpaid work. So how do we support women not just as workers, but as a whole, right? Because as women, we are whole. We're not just working, we're not just mothers, we are whole person. So that's what Mujeres en Acción is in a nutshell. But who do we really organize, right? And who are impacted? So we're talking about secrets and chemicals. So we know, and I'm sure it's been talked about, right, that women of color, right, are impacted in very different ways, are overexposed. But I want to share a little bit deeper, right, specifically around what we do with Mujeres en Acción. So we know women of color, right, are impacted. We work specifically with immigrant women, workers, and I just want to share what that looks like. So we work with promotoras, and I know they're here in the room, not just our members. Shout out to the promotoras. Our community health workers. Yeah. So we work with promotoras, both paid and unpaid, because let's be real, for those that know this, promotoras do a lot of unpaid work in the community. And it's great when they can get paid to do this community education. So we work with promotoras and supporting them in learning what are the issues that, more from a technical side, right? Because often promotoras already come from these communities that are facing these issues, not just around chemical exposure, but just environmental justice issues overall. So we support with providing that education, providing that support with understanding a little bit more about what the root causes of those issues are. The promotoras, but a big focus of our organization of Mujeres en Acción are domestic workers. And why domestic workers, right? And domestic workers, household workers, we are talking about women in particular that work in private homes doing cleaning, being nannies, being caregivers, right? So basically the industry of care, right? In private homes, that's what we're talking about. So why is it that we focus on domestic workers in particular? Aside from the fact that the majority of our base are domestic workers, there really isn't, at a national level, right, and at a state level, there is a big movement for at least 10 years, at least, of really pushing, right, of organizing and bringing together this industry. But here in LA, there aren't that many organizations that are working specifically on domestic work. We are part of a coalition, of a statewide coalition that does organize domestic workers, but there's just so much to do with this industry. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, we know that there are about 300,000 domestic workers in the state of California, right? And we think that that's an undercount, right? Because we know that this industry is actually pretty fluid. If women can find work, they will go into it. Often they have to be in and out or have multiple jobs, just depending on the need and the availability of work, really. And so that's just kind of a snapshot in terms of California. But here specifically in LA, we know that a lot of that industry is really concentrated here in Los Angeles. And what does that mean in terms of employers? We know that means about 2 million employers here in the state of California. So definitely domestic work is a big industry here in the state, but that doesn't really match to the policies and protections that should be in play to support this industry, these workers. So that's domestic workers. And how is this connected to like chemical secrecy? So earlier, my boss here alluded, right, to in what ways domestic workers or house cleaners or nannies, how are they overexposed and underprotected? So mostly house cleaners, but we see that all types of domestic workers do some type of house cleaning as well, even if they're nannies or they're caregivers. So there was a recent study, for those that weren't in the room when this was brought up, there was a recent study that came out. It's one of the few long-term studies that looks at mostly women that were doing some type of janitor type of work. So they were consistently being exposed to cleaning products. And it's one of the few long-term studies, and they wanted to look at what were the impact on their health. What do you imagine was their impact on their health over a course of, I think it was about 10 years? What do you imagine? Any? Respiratory, yes. One of the main issues that they found was respiratory issues. They found that their lung capacity had significantly decreased. It was equivalent to someone that had been smoking 20 cigarettes a day, right? So this is something that's really hard for us when we're doing trainings, when we're having health and safety conversations with workers, because to talk about exposure and impact, we also need to talk about power, right? When thinking about all these issues, right? How much control do workers actually have in terms of that exposure, right? And so for us, it's not just about the piece about policy and all of that, but also making sure that we talk about power and relationships within who has control and who doesn't, right? So domestic work for us is a big issue around prevention and really making sure that these workers are represented in these conversations. And then moms and parents. And I purposely try to kind of show that crossover because the reality is that a lot of our members at IDEPSCA, part of Mujeres en Acción, actually fit all of those three, right? In many ways, many of our members have been promotoras trained at Esperanza Housing, but also do domestic work, but also are mothers of young children, right? And again, for us, it's important to show those crossovers because that's how we should be organizing, right? Holistically, and also trying to approach solutions from that perspective. Okay, so something a little bit more exciting for me is what does the advocacy look like, right? What does the organizing look like for Mujeres en Acción and just domestic workers and moms here in LA? So some of the things, and you might see some faces that are here in the room, but I really wanted to show, right, that there's kind of three levels to the type of work that Mujeres en Acción does in terms of thinking of the solution. So earlier, I think somebody was mentioning about, the need for those solutions to come out of our communities and start practicing what we imagine those solutions looking like. And a lot of our membership does that. A lot of our staff, that's our main focus. So in these pictures, you can see some of our staff doing workshops, whether it be at health fairs or whether it be at our day labor centers, doing these workshops around bringing awareness about chemical cleaning products, right? Toxic cleaning products. And some of the things that we do that is really fun are these small demonstrations on how to create your own cleaning products with very cheap or relatively cheap products like baking soda and vinegar that could be just as useful and not as expensive. And, the demonstration is kind of the end piece of it, but a lot of it is a conversation about how is it an environmental injustice, right? That our people, that our communities, people that look like us are being overexposed without knowing it, right? So then we say, okay, if this is the reality right now, what can we start doing to be able to at least shift that at a small scale? So for us, this is one way that we respond to as a community. How can we start to have different conversations and practices? One of those ways is creating our own cleaning products. Another thing, well, this is a tool we use as well, is how do we think, right, also of solutions differently? This little tree here is a smaller version of a larger tree that we created at the office with our environmental justice committee, just made up the same women that I was talking to you about, is how do we think about what are the root causes, right? And what will that give birth to, so to speak, right? What will be the fruits of that? And so in that tree that you see there, we have conversations around, well, what are the root causes? Why are we being exposed? Because sometimes when we have these conversations in community, it's, because people don't know, because, people don't want to go out and buy a different product. And then it becomes a lot of blaming of our own communities of color for using these products that they don't really have access to better products. So then we have conversations about what are the root causes, talking about policy, talking about environmental injustice, et cetera, et cetera. So we've created a lot of the framing or having those conversations with our community to be able to shift the conversation so that it's not an individual problem necessarily. And there you can see another tactic that we use is we do street outreach while we're trying to talk to new domestic workers that are not organized. We do a lot of these demonstrations also on the street, mostly at bus stops where domestic workers are on their way to work or on their way back. So we do a lot of that, which also helps start really good conversations with house cleaners in particular. The sequence of this is not how I thought, but it's okay. This is another level of our advocacy, which is really important. Here are some photos of this photo of an action that we supported against the 99-cent store, because advocacy also is it's not just about the community education and those solutions, but looking at the root causes, right? How is the market? How are these cleaning products industries and regulations really supporting the secrecy and the wide spread of these toxic chemicals in our communities? This campaign in particular was important for us because we know that communities of color, it's more accessible to be able to purchase from stores like the 99-cent store, where it has been found that there are a lot of products, right? Thousands of products that have toxics in them, right? So for us, it's clearly targeted towards our community. So we supported a campaign that went to deliver letters asking the 99-cent store to remove these products from its stores. And then at a more state level, one of the bills that we helped push last year, SB 258, talking about secrecy, there aren't any disclosure regulations in the country around consumer cleaning products. So the products that a lot of you might find in your house, right? 4-9, Windex, Clorox, bleach. Those products, there aren't any laws that really regulate the way they disclose the ingredients that are found in them. And so we supported Senator Lara, right, in this bill, really in conversations that first came out with domestic workers about needing to know what are in these products. Ideally, right, this is just the first step for us. It's not enough to just know. We don't just want to know, right? We don't want to be exposed to them, period. But we understood that this was an important step in being able to get there. So we supported this bill, and you can see some fun photos there. And lastly, I think just wanted to share, right, that it's, again, bringing it back to our families, bringing it back to our communities, that it's not just about the education, but also practicing these solutions. At the top, you could see our small community garden that we have at the office, which has been a beautiful project with our moms, with children that are members of the organization, also talking about what can community gardens look like, right? Also here in the city, when we don't have that much space, when we're renters, what could that look like? And then the other photo is of a community cleanup that we did right around our office, right? For Earth Day, talking about what does it mean, or what's the connection to Earth Day and the exposure to cleaning products and other toxics in the environment. So for us, it was a way to really show up for our community and our living space. And that's our information.
So thank you. So this issue of secrets and trade secrets comes up a lot in this work around toxics. And the other thing, I want to sort of direct this both to Angela and Jane. One of the issues that comes up when we're working with communities and trying to figure out, well, what's in that smokestack? What's that chemical? What's in that product? Aside from figuring out that there's a whole bunch of the things in there that are secret, the first line of defense is usually the community wants a health study or wants to understand what the health issues are. What advice do you have, particularly for public health folks who may end up working with communities around doing some sort of health assessment? Mm-hmm.
Health risk assessments are like captured spies. Okay? Torture them long enough and they'll tell you anything. So when people say they want a health risk assessment, that's just, okay, we need more study to tell us that lead is harmful in your body, or we need more study to tell you that this is harmful in your water. Usually risk assessments and quite frankly, health studies are just a delay tactic to actually take action that is we already know we need to reduce air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution. So it's just a fig leaf and a delay tactic. And a lot of the times I've seen risk assessments and health studies actually used as an excuse not to reduce pollution, not as an excuse to reduce pollution.
Mhm. Also, I just wanted to build on that and say that if someone suggests that they want to do a health risk assessment, the answer is we already know that lead is a neurotoxin. We know that this facility emits lead. Let's just stop the neurotoxin from coming out of the facility, right? So redirect the conversation away from these questions that are about, let's talk some more about whether or not you're being harmed, to standing your ground and saying, we already know that we're being harmed. The science around lead has existed for, at least 100 years, right? Thousands of years in reality, right? So these notions about we can keep studying to ever finer degree the ways in which you're harmed and documenting those harms and have that stand in the way of actually changing real people's lived experiences is something that we should try to move away from. And the public health community can play an important role in that, right? Insisting that we've already collected up a lot of information. We already have a lot of insight into how these things impact people. And we're going, as a public health community, insist that we take that we take proactive steps to address the harms that the community members have already identified.
So, so I want to maybe lift up a little bit about this concept of precaution. There is this thing called the precautionary principle. It's in essence better safe than sorry. So for all of us in public health, we know the tobacco story, right? If you went to public health school, you learned about it. What California did, it passed a proposition, Prop 99, created a tax on cigarettes that then created a whole environmental health infrastructure. It was the first anti-corporate public health campaign. I got to work on it, but it really was the health community being really bold and saying the use of this product as directed is costing the health, it's costing too much. This is what it's costing to health. These are the price of it. And who led in one of the most powerful battles was the health department, right? And so if you think of what we've heard today, sort of the litany of what it's doing to water, soil, and air, sort of the cumulative impacts of having, climate change and all these toxic chemicals and melt. So it's not a good thing, right? We should already be acting to prevent it. So this idea of precaution is that we know enough to act. And, we were prepping earlier, and I want to hand it over to Jane, is that we said, well, what do we need? What should people be doing? And I don't want to step on her line, but we really do need to, from the public health point of view, say, this is not sustainable with human health, and we need to find a better alternative and just stand bold. And so I want to kick it over to Jane about, well, what should all be doing?
So, when I was a little girl, we had this poem that we read in grammar school, and it was a poem about how will the world end? Will it end by fire or by ice? Now, probably those of you who are my age might remember that. It was like required reading, like when you were in second, third grade. Well, here's the irony, right, of today. What's killing us is pollution. And really, Chief Seattle was 100% prescient when he said, here's these invading hordes of people. And there was this famous, confrontation between Chief Seattle and one of the invaders, right? And he said, mark my words, you will die in your own residue. Here we are. We are literally dying in our own residue. We spend 26% of gross domestic product right now on health. If I'm not going to, there's HIPAA requirements, but if I asked how many of you in this room are dealing with a chronic health problem, over 50% of you would raise your hands. Okay. Literally, our society is so sick. We spend more on chronic disease now than we do on any other single thing, even on food or on defense or on education. So I don't know how long, I'm the environmental economist in the room, I don't know how long our society can really sustain this. But what is killing our earth and what is killing us is pollution. And, really we've normalized it, that it's okay. That, pollution, air pollution, water pollution, well, it's just like the status quo. It's just the norm. I don't know if we survive this, we're going to look back like 500 years from now, we're going to say, wow, it's like those people, didn't they get it? You can't just release all these chemicals into the air and into the water and not have payback. There's no free lunch. So I think that we really have to get out of our comfort zones. And this is what I want to say. I'm not sure how much long we have, but this is what I want to say, because I don't know who's in the room. All right. All I know is this, that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, if you're in an agency, if you're in school, if you're, working in a promotora and home, bloom where you're planted. Wherever you are, there is something that you can do about this problem. You can reduce use of chemicals. You can stand up in your community. Don't allow that warehouse to go in. Don't allow that freeway to expand. Use your power to vote. Educate your families. Educate your friends. Educate your neighborhoods. But literally, it's ironic that it's not fire and it's not ice. It's pollution that's killing us. And we know it, and we just can't get out of our own way. So the only way to change that is through individual action. And to pull the veil off the coffin and really realize that 500 years from now, people are going to look back in time and going to say, wow, they emitted all this stuff into the environment and they didn't think it was going to harm them. And look what happened. That's my social commentary.
And I, so one of this idea of blooming where you stand is incredibly important. Because if it's a plant, it has roots and it's a network. And we need to root our work, thinking of what Dr. Pavula said earlier, really centering our work around the most vulnerable, because then you protect everyone. So really, you are protecting, and I think it's right? The idea that our infant mortality among African American women is higher today than under slavery, under Jim Crow. That is that's our wound. That's a national wound that we need to figure out, right? And so, bloom where you stand around dismantling racism and dismantling that how that structure works within your institutions. Our work that we do at Stand LA, we had a report from the health department, and even though individually probably folks wanted to be bolder, collectively, how within agencies do you embolden your colleagues and allies that work within the agency to be bolder, right? Because we know that the way that the regulatory agencies are not minding the store, right? And so my last question, and then we'll go to questions from the audience, is, on this cleaning products bill, right? The fight that we had, that what the community wanted versus what people thought we could win. If you could talk a little bit about that and how having a strong health voice would have helped.
Good question. Let's see. Okay. So let's see. Just to give you a sense of what SB 258 looked like, I don't think I went in depth into what we actually got out of it. But basically what it's going to do in the course of the next 5 years is provide some general disclosure on labels and online around what are the ingredients on consumer cleaning products, right? Something that doesn't exist in the rest of the country. The reason why we were there was because we know that domestic workers, particularly house cleaners, right, are overexposed. Even though these are consumer products, they're used at different levels, right? So someone that might use bleach might be not as exposed as a house cleaner that uses this every day in her place of work, right? In someone's home. So for us, it was important to bring that experience to that bill. Initially, we had a lot more demands added to what we wanted in that policy. Initially, it was a conversation of, well, labeling already exists for other products. Quote unquote disclosure of some level already exists for like food and other products. And what good has that done for us, for our communities that are overexposed? In conversations with our members, we were like, what do we need? What additional information do we need other than all these names of toxics that we don't even know what they are? And what members said is we need visuals, right? We need clear information about the health impact, right? I don't know whatever cleaning ingredient it has. I don't know what that chemical is. That's completely foreign to me. But I want to know, is that connected to causing cancer? Is that connected to causing asthma? That will get my attention, make me think twice, maybe not about using it at work because I might not have control over that, but definitely using it at home, right? So initially, that was our push. Our push was, as an organization, because members wanted this, was we need pictograms, we need more information, we need things in Spanish to be written on these labels and online. Basically, more information, but information that actually will translate to people of color and working class people. What happened? There wasn't enough, and I'm just going to say because that's what it was. It felt in many ways like advocates that were part of that work had not done their homework, right? It was way later in the process that we realized that there was certain federal regulations that didn't allow for new pictograms to get placed on cleaning products. This was really shocking to us as an organization because that's not our focus. We don't know in detail the regulations on products. That's not our focus of work. Our focus of work is organizing, community education, the impacts that it has on workers. That was one. And as an organization, and I can tell you it was a lesson for us as an organization as well. We were ready to pull out when they told us we can't put pictograms because there's a federal law that doesn't allow it. We were like, we're ready to go. This is why we came into this bill. We are going to pull out. And we were supporting not just on a local level, but on a state level, moving domestic workers towards pushing for this bill. Our members said, you better stay at that table. If they take our pictograms, we need to know what the conversations are going to be with the companies. What are they going to give up? What else are they going to give us if they're not going to be able to give us the pictures we want to put on there? What is going to be the trade-off? And that was a lesson for us as organizers, right? That we don't always know best. Most of the time we don't. It's actually the communities that are impacted. Domestic workers were like, this is the first time that we can be at the table with Johnson & Johnson. This is the first time that we can confront them and tell them, right, we're getting all these chemical burns because of your product. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to tell us? What can we negotiate? Because that's really what it came down to. A negotiation between workers and these companies about what are you going to give us in exchange. What turned out to happen is that we were able to negotiate being able to disclose all the ingredients that are on all these different lists that are already known to be harmful to reproductive health and to general health, including fragrances, which is a huge issue that is usually a very top secret for a lot of these cleaning products. So it was a lesson, but I think it would have been in many ways helpful to have more researchers, more policy experts at the table with us, listening to what workers need, which is let's know what are the real health impacts of these cleaning products, short term and long term. A lot of our members know what the short terms are. You can just look at their hands. You can ask them about their health. I know there's doctors and nurses and public health people in the room. You see it at the clinics. You know that there are higher rates of all these different chronic diseases and different respiratory problems with your patients, right? Ask them what they do for a living. It's all connected. So just to learn on SB 258, we need more of our folks. Earlier, I heard something about getting out of our comfort zone. We need to get out of our niche or our fields, really thinking about who we serve and what communities we are supporting to really cross those bridges.
Are we doing questions now? Oh, yeah.